Hello everybody, this is Dragonzilla1991, and for today's/tonight's review, I will be covering this set of extinct animals that don't really get represented that often. Now these figures are not made by the usual heavyweight companies, those being Safari and Collector, etc. and so on, but by Kaiyodo, which is a Japanese company. So you could say that these are Gashapons. I not only have high-grade models on kaiju and the odd cryptid, but I also own some dinosaurs and prehistoric animals, mainly from the Kaiyodo Dino Tales series, but perhaps we'll look at those another time. The set came with fact sheets that not only promote these models, but also provide some facts on the animals themselves. However, it's all in Japanese, but luckily I know a lot on these creatures, well mainly the prehistoric giants at least. First up is Platybelodon, who at first may look like some hairless pig tabia hybrid, but of course he was a species of elephant, which makes him a Protocidian. Platybelodon itself lived during the Miocene epoch, originally evolving 15 million years ago, and then went extinct 10 million years ago, possibly due to climate change. The base depicts what appears to be a swamp-like environment, even though to my knowledge they now say that Platybelodon do not live in swampy environments, so I've heard. My favourite part would be the water effect, and the sides look like miniature waterfalls. They didn't have to do that, but it looks rather nice and peaceful. So for the animal itself. Now I don't have any Platybelodon models in the collection. I have its cousin, the Safari Ambelodon, that I reviewed on the channel many years ago, links in the description below. But not Platybelodon itself, until now obviously. As a kid I remember being obsessed over this mammal. I don't really know why that was, maybe because it looked different. However, what I do know is that younger me would have absolutely loved this figure. The model is light grey, which is suitable for a Protocidian like Platybelodon, but when you take a second look, then you will notice that its back is almost a light tan green colour. I'm not sure what it's meant to be, possibly it's swamp moist, I have no idea. But I will say that it does add to the realism. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Kaiyodo have done a second Platybelodon for their UHA range, and while it's cleaner in comparison, it is however bigger than this one. So at present I'm still deciding whether or not to add it to my wish list and pick it up someday. But what really makes Platybelodon so unique would be its elongated head, which only makes this animal look even more bizarre than usual, because elephants don't come with elongated jaws these days. But this design was not just exclusive to Platybelodon in its kind, but other Protocidiums like Megatherium also possess head designs like this as well. Platybelodon doesn't really get represented that often, and it's a real shame because it's another recognisable giant from the Cenozoic, and I would honestly love to see maybe either Eofauna or Collector do their interpretation of this animal. Well, any company except Schleich. Anyway, before we move on to the next animal, here is Platybelodon with the Kaiyodo woolly mammoth and Paleoloxodon. Another species that doesn't get represented is Phyllocosmilus, which at first looks like Smilodon, and could easily be mistaken for the world famous Sabertooth. However, this bizarre looking beast was not a member of the feline family tree, despite its cat-like appearance, but it was actually more closely related to marsupials, even though it was native to South America and not Australia. This figure is depicted roaring. Well, how else are you going to show off those razor-sharp saber teeth? And aside from the sabers, another thing that you'll be quick to notice will be the strange blade-like chin, which only make the animal look a bit more unique. I really do love those saber teeth. Sabertooths have always been my favourite Cenozoic predators, despite originating from the Permian period with the iconic Gorgonopsids. And in other people's reviews of this set, I have noticed that the sabers are almost close together, making the model look rather goofy, where mine turn out fine as they should be. Its head may be cat-like, as I said, but it's clearly marsupial, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I like the brown paint job, which makes it stand out from Smilodon, and the tail is longer. Oh, by the way, Phyllocosmilus also lived during the Miocene epoch, same time as Platybelodon that we looked at earlier, but much later. Even though I do prefer Smilodon a lot more, I will say that Phyllocosmilus is another cool looking carnivore. Onto the third prehistoric mammal, which is Megatherium, the giant ground sloth, who is one of the well-known icons of the Ice Age, along with the woolly mammoth and saber-toothed cat, even though it evolved in, I believe, the Pliocene epoch, a period that started millions of years before the Pleistocene. But the giant ground sloth is still considered to be an iconic Ice Age animal, nonetheless. This Gashapon shows the sloth grazing on some tender leaves, and as you can see, he has his tongue stuck out. The display comes in 3 pieces, those being the tree, the base, and of course the Sloth himself. I didn't want to dismantle the setup just for this video, but if you own the set then you know what I mean. The model is now considered to be outdated because, as I once said in my top 10 Ice Age animal video that I did last December, links in the description below, it's now reckoned that Megatherium wasn't as hairy as originally thought. The colour scheme appears to be what I can only describe as a mixture of beige and tan sandy yellow, and the other areas are grey. The figure is also one of 3 miniature ground sloths that I own in the collection. In fact, this is what he looks like with the Kaiyodo Dino Tails, Megatherium and Giant Ground Sloth from the Safari Limited Prehistoric Life Tube that I would definitely like to talk about someday at some point in the future. The script is currently being written as we speak, but the pictures have yet to be taken. The Giant Ground Sloth, aka Megatherium, is one of my all-time favourite Ice Age Goliaths, along with the mammoth, saber-toothed cat and woolly rhinoceros Coelodonta, and this Gashapon is another best out of the set. In fact, it's between him and Platybelodon. By the way, of all most of the animals in this set don't get represented that often, however the Giant Ground Sloth has had the most merchandise. The 4th miniature is the Stellar Sea Cow, and this is an animal that I know very little on, and there's not much word for it either. First I'll talk about the base, and I love it because it represents the habitat with the seafloor as well as the underwater vegetation, that the herbivore is in her environment, and we even have a peg that keeps the model in place. I've removed the plastic window just so you can see the miniature in its glory, but this is what it looks like with it on. The Stellar Sea Cow is post grazing, and I don't think we get that many figures that are depicted eating. And I also like the little seagulls that are hanging out, riding on her back, even though they're a bit too close to the head. They didn't have to include this feature, but it's really effective. This animal was fairly identical to the modern-day manatee, and there's really not a lot to say on the Stellar Sea Cow, it's just nice. Finally is an animal that I know absolutely nothing about, and that would be the speculated comrade. I might have mispronounced that one, I do apologise. But judging by the appearance, we could tell that this was a seabird. Now this animal is pretty obscure, and I believe that's because it's mostly identical to its modern-day relatives, and not counting avian dinosaurs, extinct birds really don't get represented that often. And I know this set is primarily dedicated to some rather obscure species, with the exception of the giant ground sloth Megatherium, so you would have thought they would have gone for a more famous and iconic bird, like maybe the dodo. But there isn't any merchandise, well at least to my knowledge, on the speckled comrade. In fact, this may be the only one. Like the others, it's on a display stand, which is some kind of border with a wet effect. The comrade is posed with his wings spread out, and I do like the main paint job, mostly being all black, with some green mixed in. Again, like the sea cow, there's not a lot to say, but I do like the speckled comrade, i.e. the set-soul dinosaur. I'm convinced I've butchered the name of this bird. I really do apologise, guys. So that's the entire set, everybody, and what are my opinions on it? Well, except for the giant ground sloth, the set contains animals that we don't get very often, so having Platybelodon and Phallicus smilers does make a nice change from the usual mammoth and Smilodon, even though I never get tired of them, and I welcome those giants anywhere and any time. And even though I ordered the set off eBay, but for the fun of it, I like to pretend that I got it from the Natural History Museum in London, because at the time, in early 2024, last year, I ordered it not long after returning from the vacation. As for how would I rank these? Well, basically, it's in the order that we looked them in, but in reverse. And my top 2 favourites are of course Platybelodon and Megatherium. It may not be the greatest of Gashapon sets, but I would still recommend it, especially if you're an extinct animal enthusiast like myself. And yes, you could also get these individually off eBay if you're only after 1 or 2. However, I would also be careful, because I think I may have seen what appear to be bootleg versions of these miniatures. Anyways, this is Dragonzilla1991 signing out. Take care, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.